The house had been on the market for so long that its listing photos looked like they were from another decade. Peeling wallpaper, sun-faded curtains, furniture covered in sheets like a home frozen in time. Most people saw it as a red flag. I saw it as an opportunity. When the realtor told me the previous owner had vanished under unclear circumstances and that the locals didn't like to talk about it, I laughed it off. Houses don't make people disappear. Bad people are bad. Luck do. Besides, the price was too good to pass up. On moving day, I worked from sunrise until the sky turned a dull orange. The house was bigger than I remembered, each room echoing with the sound of my footsteps. Old wood groaned beneath my weight, and every draft found its way under my skin. Still, it had charm sunlight streaming through tall windows, intricate crown molding in the living room, and that faint scent of something old but harmless, like forgotten books. I was halfway through unpacking when I found the first oddity. It was in the master bedroom, tucked into the far corner like it was trying to be forgotten. A narrow door, only about shoulder width, painted the same beige as the walls. So, almost disappeared. I hadn't noticed it during the walkthrough. The knob felt cold. When I opened it, I found a cramped cubby barely big enough for a person to stand in. Nothing inside, just bare wood and shadows. But the air was different. Stale. Heavy. I stood there longer than it meant to, my skin prickling for no reason. I could name storage, I told myself, closing it and twisting the lock into place. The second oddity was in the basement. It was a single closet door, reinforced with a thick, rusted lock, set against an otherwise bare concrete wall. Everything else in the basement was open laundry area, old shelves, the kind of space you might use for tools. But this door didn't belong. It was too deliberate, too secretive. I added 5 bolt cutters to my mental to-do list and went back upstairs. That night, I collapsed into bed, muscles aching from hauling boxes. The house was silent except for the occasional creak of settling wood. I just started to drift off when I heard it tap, 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 3 slow, deliberate. Knocks from the direction of the narrow door. I sat up, my heart thudding in my ears. The sound stopped as soon as I moved. For a full minute I listened, holding my breath, every muscle in my body tight. Nothing. Finally, I grabbed my phone, switched on the flashlight, and patted across the floor. The lock was still in place, exactly how I'd left it. Old pipes. I whispered to myself, though even I didn't believe it. I went back to bed, but sleep never really came. When I woke the next morning, sunlight was spilling through the curtains. For a brief moment, I let myself think the night had been a trick of exhaustion. But when I turned toward the narrow door, my stomach dropped. The lock was undone. The door stood slightly ajar. The room felt colder now, and the air from inside the cubby carried a faint, damp smell like wet soil and rotting wood. I stepped closer, hesitating only a second before pulling it open. Empty, just as before. No dust disturbed, no footprints. No sign anyone had been inside. And yet, something was different. I closed it firmly, twisting the lock twice this time, and tugged on it until I was sure it wouldn't move. But the image of that door cracked open while I slept stayed with me all day. The second night felt heavier. I told myself it was just moving, fatigue, that creeping dread that comes with sleeping in an unfamiliar place. But even as I moved through the house during the day, unpacking books and dishes, the narrow door in the bedroom stayed fixed in my mind. There wasn't fear so much as a wrongness. Every time I walked past the bedroom, my eyes darted toward it, just to make sure it was still locked. Each time it was. I tugged the knob once, twice, like a compulsive ritual, and then carry on with whatever I'd been doing. By evening, I was too exhausted to keep busy. I made a lazy dinner, scrolled through my phone, and tried to convince myself not to think about the cubby or the basement closet. That lock downstairs felt like a dare. Around midnight, I crawled into bed. The air in the room was cooler than the rest of the house, like the heating didn't quite reach this far. I lay still, eyes half closed, and tried to focus on the faint hum of the refrigerator from the kitchen. For a while it worked. Then tap, tap, tap. I opened my eyes. The sound came from the narrow door again. Slow, intentional. I stayed frozen, my ears straining. This time, the knocks didn't stop when I stirred. They continued, evenly spaced, almost patient. Who's there? My voice came out shaky, too quiet to sound like a real threat. The tapping stopped. Silence filled the room, but it was different now, thicker somehow, like the air was pressing down on me. And then, from beyond the door, I heard it. Breathing, faint, shallow, and undeniably human. I bolted upright, grabbed my phone, and flicked on the flashlight. The lock was still in place, unmoved. I crept forward, heart hammering so loudly. It was hard to hear. I pressed my ear to the door. For a moment, nothing. Then the breathing returned, soft and slow, like someone trying to hide. My whole body jerked back. I snapped on the bedroom light, flooding the room with a jaundiced glow. The breathing stopped instantly. I didn't sleep that night. I sat up, back against the wall, staring at that door until the sky began to pale. When morning finally came, I was dizzy with exhaustion, my thoughts muddled and heavy. I needed to prove to myself there was nothing there. I approached the door cautiously, running my fingers over the lock. Still engaged, still solid. I exhaled and gave the knob a twist just to be sure, no movement. See, I whispered to myself, but as I turned to leave, something caught my eye. Scratches. They were faint, but their thin, jagged lines running along the edge of the door near the handle. I leaned in, tracing them with a fingertip. They weren't random. They looked deliberate, like something had been clawing at the wood. I pulled my hand back fast, a shiver crawling across my shoulders. My stomach turned. I tried to tell myself the scratches had always been there, that I'd just missed them yesterday. But deep down, I knew better. The thought of calling someone flickered through my head. What? And what would I even say? Hi. There's breathing in my closet, and I think something scratched my door. Instead, my thoughts drifted to the basement. That locked closet. Maybe there were answers in there. Or maybe I just needed distraction from the growing paranoia eating at me. Either way, I found myself standing at the top of the basement stairs. Before I'd really decided to go down. The air was colder here, and the smell of damp concrete filled my nose. Shadows pooled in the corners, refusing to budge even under the weak light from the single bulb above the stairs. I descended slowly, the wooden steps creaking under my weight. The padlocked closet stood at the far end like it had been waiting. For me, the lock was thick, its surface spotted with rust, the hinges tarnished from age. I grabbed the bolt cutters from my toolbox. My hands trembled as I positioned them around the lock's shackle. The metal groaned, then snapped with a sharp clink. The lock fell to the floor, the sound echoing through the basement like a warning. I hesitated before opening the door, my hand hovering over the knob. The smell hit first damp earth, rot, something older than the house itself. Inside, dust and cobwebs coated everything. At the center sat an old wooden chest, its edges warped. With age, I knelt and pried it open. Papers. I pulled one free, unfolding it carefully. Blueprints of the house. The layout was mostly what I remembered, except for one detail. An extra room. It was labeled storage and connected directly to the master bedroom, exactly where the narrow door was. My pulse quickened as I scanned the margins. In faded, shaky handwriting, someone had scrawled, "Do not open, do not disturb." I sat on the basement floor for a long time, staring at the blueprints in my lap. The words scribbled in the margins seemed to pulse in my mind. Do not open. Do not disturb. Why? Who had written them? And why hadn't the realtor mentioned this so-called storage room? The basement felt colder now, as though opening the closet had let something out. I shoved the blueprints back into the chest, slammed the lid shut, and stood quickly, wiping the dust from my hands. As I climbed the stairs, the air seemed heavier, pressing in on my chest with each step. The bulb above me flickered once before. I reached the top, plunging the basement into shadow behind me. I shut the door firmly, leaning against it for a moment. Back in the bedroom, the narrow door stood exactly where I'd left it. The scratches near the handle seemed deeper than they had that morning, fresh gouges in the wood. I locked the bedroom door before night fell. I told myself it was just for peace of mind. By 11 p.m., I was lying in bed, staring at the ceiling. Every creak in the house felt amplified. My ears strained for the inevitable tapping, but the silence stretched on so long that my eyelids began to droop. Then tap, tap, tap. 3 deliberate knocks, slow and steady. I bolted upright, my skin crawling. The sound was louder than before, like whatever was making it was closer to the surface of the door. The tapping stopped, replaced by the sound. I dreaded Mo's breathing. Not faint this time. Not distant thought right on the other side. It was heavier now, ragged, as though whoever or whatever was there had been running. My phone was already in my hand, the flashlight beam trembling across the floorboards as I swung it toward the narrow door. The lock was still in place, but it looked loose somehow, hanging slightly off the latch. "Who's there?" My voice cracked on the last word. The breathing stopped. The silence that followed was thick, suffocating. I took a step forward, every muscle in my body screaming not to. I reached out, my fingers brushing the cool metal. Of the lock, the knob twisted under my hand. I yanked it back as if it had burned me, stumbling away until I hit the bed. My heart slammed against my ribs, the flashlight shaking violently in my grip. The knob turned fully now, slow and deliberate, but the door didn't open. I could hear the faint scrape of something against wood-like nails dragging across it from the inside. "Stay back." I shouted, but my voice sounded too small, too hollow in the room's stale air. Then it spoke. It's mine. The words were low, guttural, soaked in anger. They didn't sound like any human voice I'd ever heard there. Was something in them that scraped at the inside of my skull. I froze, my blood turning to ice. "What's yours?" I whispered, though I didn't want to know the answer. No reply. The breathing started again, heavier now, and the knob rattled, violently. I lunged forward and slammed the lock fully into place, then backed away fast. The rattling stopped instantly. For a second, I thought it was over. Then, bang, the impact rattled the frame of the door. Bang. Dust fell from the top of the door frame, drifting in the yellow lamplight. Bang. The floorboards beneath my feet trembled. I stumbled backward into the hallway, slamming the bedroom door shut behind me. My pulse was so loud in my ears I could barely hear the creaks that followed soft, deliberate footsteps moving inside the bedroom. I didn't go back in that night. I curled up on the couch in the living room, flashlight gripped tight in my fist, staring at the darkened hallway until the first light of dawn crept through the windows. By morning, the house was still again. I crept back to the bedroom, my stomach in knots. The narrow door was shut, the lock dangling loosely from the latch. The scratches were longer now, deeper, almost cutting through the wood entirely. I didn't touch it. I couldn't. Instead, I shoved a heavy dresser in front of it and told myself it would be enough. The house stayed quiet for most of the day. I unpacked more boxes just to have something to focus on, trying to ignore the occasional feeling that I was being watched. But when night came again, the silence in the bedroom felt expectant, like something was waiting. I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the dresser, blocking the narrow door. My skin prickled, the air too still. No tapping this time. Just the sound of wood slowly, steadily splintering from the other side. I didn't sleep that night. I sat on the bed with the flashlight pointed at the dresser, waiting. The sound of splintering wood was slow and steady, like someone dragging their fingernails along the inside of the narrow door, peeling away the fibers one by one. Every few minutes it stopped, as though whatever was doing it was listening for. By 2 a.m., the air in the bedroom felt too thick to breathe. My chest ached with every inhale, my ears straining for the next sound. It came without warning. Crack. The dresser shifted an inch across the floor. I jumped to my feet, flashlight beam jerking. The gouges in the door were deeper, now so deep I could see darkness beyond them. The lock hung loose, the screws barely holding to the frame. The dresser moved again, scraping against the hardwood with a groan. I backed toward the bedroom door, but I couldn't seem to tear my eyes away from that narrow frame. From behind it came the voice again, low and gravelly. "Let me in." I shook my head before I even realized I was doing it. "No, stay." There. The silence that followed was worse than the words. Then the whole door shuddered, wood splintering, the dresser jerking forward like a toy pushed by a child. I lunged for the hull, but the sound that came next froze me in place. It wasn't banging. It wasn't scratching. It was the click of the lock sliding open. The door didn't swing wide. It crept forward an inch at a time, the hinges groaning, in protest. The dresser scraped aside under a force I couldn't see. The smell hit me before I saw anything: damp earth, rot, and something sour, like old blood. My flashlight trembled in my hand as I pointed it toward the widening gap. At first, there was nothing but darkness. Then, something pale emerged, a hand. It was too long, the fingers thin and jointed strangely, bending at angles they shouldn't. The nails or claws were thick and yellow, edges jagged. They curled around the edge of the door. I stumbled backward, my heel catching on the rug. The flashlight's beam wavered, catching glimpses of what followed. An arm, impossibly thin but corded with sinewy muscle, skin stretched taut over bone. Then came the head. It ducked low to fit through the frame, hair hanging in damp, matted clumps. The skin was a sickly gray, slick with something that caught the light. Its eyes, if they were eyes, were sunken pits, but within them something glinted faintly, like shards of glass catching the light. Its mouth hung open, the corners splitting too far, revealing rows of small, needle-like teeth. It crouched there in the doorway, head cocked, breathing fast like a predator that's just found its prey. I'd backed into the hallway, my hand fumbling for the bedroom door. My heart hammered so loud it drowned out everything else. Then it moved. Not toward me, but into the room's slow, deliberate steps, like it was savoring the space. Its head turned, scanning the walls, the ceiling, like someone inspecting a place they'd once known. When its gaze, or whatever passed for its gaze, finally landed on me, the corners of its mouth curled upward in a grotesque imitation of a smile. "It's mine," it whispered again, the words wetter this time, almost a hiss. That broke me. I slammed the bedroom door shut and bolted down the hall, the sound of claws scraping hardwood chasing me. I didn't stop until I was outside on the porch, barefoot and shaking, gulping in the cold and night air. From the upstairs window I saw movement. It was standing there behind the glass, watching me. Its head tilted slowly to one side, like it couldn't understand why I'd left. The faintest tap-tap-tap echoed against the window pane. I didn't go back into the house until the sun was fully out. From the porch, everything looked normal. No movement in the upstairs window. No tapping. No sign that the thing I'd seen had ever been real, except for the deep, jagged gouges in the bedroom doorframe, and the dresser now lying tipped over in the middle of the floor. The narrow door stood wide open. I didn't look inside. I couldn't. Instead, I left the house for most of the day. I wandered aimlessly through town, lingering in coffee shops, bookshops, anywhere with other people and fluorescent lighting. By the time I returned, the sun was sinking, and dread was pooling in my stomach like a stone. I told myself I'd sleep on the couch. I even set up a blanket and pillow there. But when night came, a sound followed me. It began as soft creaks, above footsteps crossing the bedroom. Then they moved to the hall. The boards groaned under the weight, slow and measured, heading toward the stairs. I sat frozen, eyes locked on the shadowed mouth of the staircase. The creaks grew louder, closer, until something reached the bottom step. Then silence. My pulse thundered in my ears. I could feel the stillness of the house pressing against me, like it was holding its breath. A shadow moved in the corner of my vision. I turned, but nothing was there. When I looked back, it was halfway into the living room. It didn't walk like a person. Its limbs moved in jerky, deliberate motions, each step too long, its body swaying, unnaturally. The pale skin gleamed faintly in the dim light, stretched so tight it looked like it might tear. Its head tilted toward me, that awful grin pulling wider, revealing teeth that seemed sharper now. I couldn't move. My muscles refused to obey. It crouched down, resting its long, twisted fingers on the floor, nails scraping against the wood. "This is mine," it rasped, softer now, like a lullaby meant for no one human. I swallowed hard, forcing my voice to work. "What is?" "It's..." Grin faltered, the head tilting further. "You." Something primal inside me broke. I grabbed the flashlight and lunged for the front door, shoving it open so hard it hit the wall. Cold air rushed in as I stumbled onto the porch. For a moment, I thought I left it behind. The night was silent, but for my ragged breathing, then I saw it in the yard. It was already outside, crouched low in the grass, its face turned up toward me. The darkness clung to it like a second skin, but its eyes, or the glassy glints where I should have been, caught the moonlight. I ran. I didn't stop until I reached the edge of the property. The streetlight there flickered weakly, but the thing had stopped short of it, standing just outside the glow. It tilted its head again, as if studying the boundary. It didn't follow when I stepped into the light. It just stood there, watching, its shape shifting slightly in the shadows, like it was made of something that couldn't decide on one form. I stayed under that streetlight until the first hint of it drifted into the sky. By then, it was gone. When I returned to the house, the front door was wide open. The blanket and pillow I'd left on the couch were gone, and the faint sound of tapping echoed from upstairs, not the narrow door this time. The window. I stood in the hallway at the bottom of the stairs, staring up toward the sound. Tap, tap, slow, patient, deliberate. The light through the bedroom door was dim gray morning light, fighting its way past heavy clouds, but I could still see movement at the window. It wasn't the kind of movement you get from a branch swaying in the wind. It was rhythmic, purposeful. I took the first step up, each board groaning under my weight. Halfway to the top, the tapping stopped. The silence was worse. It was as if the house was leaning forward, listening with me. Then came the scrape. It was sharp, metallic, and wet somehow like claws dragging across glass. My pulse spiked. When I reached the bedroom door, I saw it. It was crouched on the other side of the window, pressed so close its face was nearly flat against the glass. Its mouth was open in that grotesque grin, teeth glinting. A pale tongue slid across the surface, leaving a trail that caught the light. It wasn't breathing fast this time. It was steady, calm, like it knew I couldn't stop it. The dresser I'd shoved in front of the narrow door still lay tipped over. The narrow door itself gaped open, leading into blackness. Whatever was inside that hidden space had followed me out, and now it had found another way in. It tapped again. One long finger, the nail cracked and yellow, tapped exactly where my eyeline met its. Then it spoke, and the sound made my vision blur. "Let me in." I shook my head without realizing it. No. Its grin widened until the skin at the corners of its mouth split. A thin line of dark fluid trickled down its chin. It leaned closer, the glass creaking under the pressure. "You're mine." The pane cracked. I stumbled backward, my heel hitting the fallen dresser. The crack spread, splintering outward like ice on a frozen pond. The glass gave way with a shriek, and a pale hand shot through, fingers groping blindly for purchase. The smell of damp earth and rot poured into the room, making my stomach heave. I bolted down the stairs, through the hall, into the kitchen. My bare feet slapped against the floor, my breath ragged. I didn't look back, not even when I heard the crunch of glass under something heavy landing inside the bedroom. The front door was only a few feet away. Something moved in my periphery. I turned just enough to see it crawling along the ceiling of the hallway, its limbs bent at impossible angles. The sound of nails gouging the plaster echoing above me. I ran harder. My hand closed around the doorknob and yanked it open. Cold air hit my face, and then something wrapped around my ankle. I hit the porch hard, my chin slamming against the wood. Stars exploded in my vision. The grip on my ankle tightened, claws digging into skin. I kicked wildly, my heel connecting with something soft. It hissed a wet, guttural sound, and the grip loosened just enough for me to tear free. I scrambled out into the yard, running toward the streetlight. My lungs burned, my vision swam, but I didn't stop until I was standing in its sickly yellow glow. Behind me it stood just beyond. The circle of light, its head tilted slowly, studying the boundary the way it had before. The grin was gone now. It crouched there for a long moment, unmoving, then began retreating toward the house, back into the shadows, back toward the open window. I didn't follow. By the time the sun rose, I was long gone, driving until the road signs blurred and the landscape became unfamiliar. I don't know if it's still in that house. I don't know if it ever really leaves. But sometimes when I wake in the middle of the night in a place I've never lived before, I think I hear it. Soft, patient. Tap, tap, tap. The house wasn't much to look at. 2 stories. White paint that had faded into the color of cigarette ash. A porch that sagged slightly toward the street. The front yard was more dirt than grass, but it was cheap and it was mine. The realtor told me it had been sitting empty for over 7 years. She didn't know why, or at least she pretended not to. Her smile was polite but never reached her eyes, and she didn't linger in the hallway upstairs. She walked me through it quickly, pointing out the quaint character of the slanted floorboards and the vintage charm of the crooked door frames. I told myself the quirks were fine. I didn't need perfect, I needed quiet. The first day was all boxes and dust. I worked until my arms ached, eating a cold sandwich on the floor because I hadn't unpacked any plates yet. By nightfall, I was so tired I barely noticed how the shadows from the single lamp stretched unnaturally far along the bare walls. The first night was uneventful. The house creaked and groaned in the wind, but old houses always do. I told myself the faint thumps in the walls were just the place adjusting to having someone inside it again. The second night was different. I was in the kitchen, digging through a box for my coffee mug, when I heard it faint at first, then sharper, rising until it cut clean through the walls. A scream, not a startled yelp, not a playful shout. It was long, ragged, and wet around the edges, like something tearing. It came from somewhere out back, near the tree line that bordered the yard. I froze, mug halfway out of the box. The sound died, leaving the air thick and still. For a moment there was nothing, and then rustling, leaves shifting, slow and deliberate, as if something large was moving through them. I went to the window. The moon was out, bathing the yard in cold silver light. The grass looked frozen in place, every blade stiff. The trees swayed in the wind, but the shadows between them seemed too still. I waited for movement. Nothing. The rest of the night passed quietly, but I didn't sleep well. I kept listening for it. The next morning I stopped at the grocery store in town. It was small, only 2 aisles, with a single checkout counter manned by a pale woman in her 50s. She didn't greet me, just started ringing up my things. I made small talk. Where's the best place to get breakfast? Is there a hardware store nearby? She answered without looking up. When I mentioned the scream, she froze for just a moment. Her eyes flicked up to mine, wide as if I'd said something I wasn't supposed to. Then she looked back down, scanning my bread. "You've probably heard of fox," she said. Her voice was flat, but her hands were shaking slightly. I knew what foxes sounded like. This wasn't a fox. On my way out, I passed an older man standing by the bulletin board. His hands were shoved deep in the pockets of his coat, his face shadowed by the brim of a worn baseball cap. As I walked past, he reached out and gripped my arm. His hand was surprisingly strong, the skin dry and papery. "If you hear it again," he said, "keep your lights off and stay inside. Understand?" His voice was low, urgent. His breath smelled faintly of coffee and something metallic like blood. I didn't answer. I just pulled away and left. The rest of the day, I tried to shake it off. I told myself small towns have their own brand of weird, and maybe this was just a local legend or superstition. Still, the man's grip had left a faint ache in my arm. That night, the wind picked up. The whole house seemed to shift with it, the boards groaning softly. Around midnight, I unplugged the lamp in the living room. The man's warning had been gnawing at the back of my mind. And then, from somewhere just beyond the yard, it came again. The scream. This time it was closer. Sharper. It started low, then rose into a pitch that made my teeth hurt. It didn't sound entirely human. There was something else threaded through it, something animal. I sat frozen in the dark, my heart pounding. I could hear movement in the yard. Now, something heavy stepping slowly across the grass. The sound moved toward the trees, then faded, swallowed by the wind. I waited another hour before I dared move. The rest of the night stayed quiet, but I didn't sleep. At dawn, I stepped. Outside, the grass wet under my bare feet. Near the back door, I saw it. A footprint. It was bare, no tread, no shoe marks. Just the shape of a human foot pressed deep into the mud. The toes were pointing toward the house. By the third morning, I had convinced myself I was overreacting. Sure, there had been a scream and a footprint, but rural towns had their quirks. Wildlife could sound strange. Mud could play tricks on the eyes. If I wanted to live here without losing my mind, I had to stop jumping at shadows. So, I unpacked. The upstairs hallway was the worst part of the house. It slanted to one side just enough that you could feel yourself tilting as you walked. The light bulb overhead flickered even after I replaced it, like it was struggling to stay lit. I was halfway down the hall with an armful of books when I noticed a dark smear near the baseboard. At first I thought it was dirt, but when I crouched down, I saw it was too deliberate for that. The mark was about 2 feet long, the color of dried blood, starting faint and then becoming darker toward the end, like something had been dragged. A scuff mark, I told myself. Something harmless. Except it hadn't been there yesterday. I rubbed at it with my sleeve. It didn't fade. If anything, the pressure seemed to make it darker, as if the color had seeped into the wood. The rest of the morning, I tried not to think about it. Around noon, I decided to explore the town. It was a small one main road lined with a diner, the grocery store, a laundromat, and a hardware store with a dusty front window. Every other building seemed half abandoned, windows boarded or curtains drawn. The diner smelled of burnt coffee and frying bacon. I sat at the counter, ordered eggs, and tried to strike up a conversation with the waitress, a woman about my age. With tired eyes, "You've been here long?" I asked. She gave me a half smile. Too long. I mentioned the scream again, keeping my tone light. Her smile didn't change, but she set my coffee down a little too hard. Some of it sloshing. "Over the rim. You'll get used to it," she said. "Everyone does." The man from the grocery store, the one who'd warned me, was sitting in the corner booth. He didn't eat, didn't drink. Just watched me. When I left, I could still feel his eyes on my back. The wind was stronger by the time I got home. The branches of the trees out back swayed in slow arcs, scraping against one another. Inside, the mark in the hallway looked darker. That night, I made a point of leaving the lamp off early. I sat in the living room with only the moonlight through the blinds, telling myself it was stupid to be afraid of a noise. At exactly 12:14. I heard it. The scream tore through the air, closer than before. It was joined by another sound, something scraping across the siding of the house, high up near the second floor. I thought about the mark in the hallway. The scraping moved slowly, like claws or nails dragging deliberately over the wood. Then silence. I waited. 5 minutes later, there was a dull thump from upstairs. Every instinct told me to stay put, but I found myself moving, my footsteps unnervingly loud on the creaking floorboards. The hallway was darker than it should have been. The bulb overhead was dead now, though it had worked earlier. The mark was still there, but it was longer. It stretched another 6 inches down the baseboard, stopping directly beneath the window at the end of the hall. I forced myself to look outside. The yard was empty. The trees were still, and yet, faintly in the glass, I saw it, not outside in the reflection. A figure, tall and thin, standing directly behind me. I turned, but the hallway was empty. I didn't sleep that night. After seeing the reflection, I sat in the living room with my back to the wall, the kitchen light on, every other lamp dark. I kept glancing toward the hallway, half expecting to see movement. By dawn, I convinced myself it had been a trick of the light. My mind had been playing games. Hallways were perfect for that. Narrow spaces, uneven floors, flickering bulbs. Still, I avoided going upstairs until the sun was fully up. The mark was there, as dark as before. It hadn't grown any longer overnight, but the wood around it looked warped, the grain twisting slightly as if something had pressed against it from the inside. I stood there for a long time, running through reasonable explanations. None of them stuck. Around noon, I decided to get some air. The wind had died down, leaving the world unnervingly quiet. Out back, the yard sloped gently toward the tree line. That's when I saw them. Footprints. They started near the back steps there, like the one I'd found earlier and moved out toward the trees, but the spacing was strange. Too long between each print, as if whoever made them had been stepping with deliberate, almost unnatural strides. I followed them, my boots sinking slightly into the damp ground. The prints led halfway to the trees before they simply stopped, not faded, not turned around. Just stopped, like the person had vanished mid-step. I stood there staring, my breath coming faster. The trees were only 20 feet away, but I didn't go closer. Something about their stillness felt wrong. When I turned back toward the house, I noticed something else. Upstairs, one of the windows was open. It was the one at the end of the hallway, the one above the scuff mark. I hadn't opened it. That night, I locked every door and window in the house, double-checking each one. I left the upstairs hallway light on, hoping it might keep with it. This was a day. At 12:17 a.m., the bulb upstairs went out. I heard the scream immediately after closer, so close it felt like it was coming, from just outside the walls. My chest tightened, then came the scraping again. Slow, methodical, like fingernails across wood. It moved along the siding until it reached the upstairs window. Something tapped against the glass. Once, twice. Then, the sound of it sliding open. I didn't want to go upstairs, but I couldn't sit still. I grabbed the flashlight from the kitchen and started up, my hand shaking so badly the beam jittered across the walls. The hallway was darker than before. Even the moonlight through. The window seemed muted. The scuff mark stretched further, now another foot at least reaching the corner where the hallway bent toward the bathroom. The wood around it was splitting in places, fine cracks radiating outward like veins. I forced myself to look at the window. It was closed again. But on the inside of the glass, there were prints. Not fingerprints. These were long, narrow streaks, as if something with wet, uneven hands had slid them down from the top. My flashlight flickered. Somewhere behind me, the floor creaked. I turned nothing. Just the long, crooked hallway. The bulb overhead swaying slightly, even though there was no wind. That was when I saw the newest detail. At the very edge of the scuff mark, pressed faintly into the warped wood, was the impression of toes. 5 of them, bare, pointing toward my bedroom door. I didn't open my bedroom door for the rest of the night. After seeing the toe marks pressed into the warped wood of the hallway, I backed into my room and locked the door. The click of the lock was too loud in the stillness, like it had drawn attention to me instead of securing me. I stayed there, sitting on the floor with my back against the door, listening for movement on the other side. My muscles cramped. My legs went numb, but I didn't dare shift my weight. Time didn't pass normally in the house at night. It felt like I'd been sitting there for hours when I noticed the light outside had changed. Thin gray lines starting to seep around the curtains. Morning. Or at least something pretending to be morning. I still didn't feel safe. I waited another 30 minutes before unlocking the door. as though whatever was outside might just give up and leave. When I finally stepped into the hallway, I noticed immediately that something was wrong. The air was colder out here. Not the kind of cold you get from a draft or a poorly insulated wall. It was damp, heavy, like the inside of a cave. I rubbed my arms and looked down. The mark was longer again. Not by much, just a few inches, but enough that I knew it hadn't stopped. Worse, it had begun to curve slightly, a deliberate bend that turned it toward my bedroom door. It was no longer just a stain or a drag mark, it was a path, and it was coming for me. I crouched to examine it closer. The wood around it looked strange, the grain warped and swollen in places as if it had absorbed something. My fingertips hovered just above the surface, close enough to feel the faintest chill radiating from it, like touching the edge of a block of ice. I stood quickly and forced myself downstairs. That afternoon, I tried to bury myself in small, meaningless tasks, unpacking the last of my books, reorganizing the kitchen cabinets, testing the locks on every window and door. But every few minutes, my ears would prick up, straining for any sound from upstairs. It stayed quiet, too quiet. By late afternoon, the light through the windows had taken on that bruised, yellow-gray tone that comes right before sunset. Outside, the wind had returned. It whistled through the thin cracks in the window frames and made the branches outside scrape against each other in slow, uneven rhythms. I told myself I would not go upstairs again tonight. I told myself the mark would still be there in the morning, and I could deal with it then. But fear doesn't listen to reason. At 11:47 p.m., I heard the first change. The hallway light above went from steady to weak, the brightness draining until the filament inside glowed a sickly orange. It pulsed once, twice, then flared, too bright for an instant, bathing the upstairs in a sterile, unnatural white. My eyes watered, then it went out. No pop, no smell of burnt filament. Just darkness. The upstairs swallowed the light completely, like it had been waiting for this moment. I sat in bed, rigid, my hands gripping the blanket so tightly my knuckles ached. I could hear the faint hum of the fridge downstairs, the tick of the old clock in the living room. My heartbeat was too loud. The first sound came 15 minutes later. Steps. Slow, deliberate steps along the hallway floor. Not the light, hurried. Patter of an animal. Not the uneven shuffle of an old house. 7. These had weight. Each one made the boards creak and complain, as though something tall and heavy was forcing them to bend. I counted them. 1, 2, 3, 4 right outside my door. The silence that followed was worse than the footsteps. Then came the brushing sound, something dragging lightly across the door's surface, slow and purposeful. Not a knock. Not? A scratch? More like a caress, fingertips tracing the wood. The smell followed. At first it was faint, something I thought I imagined. But it grew thicker, heavier, until it was all I could breathe in damp soil. Rotting leaves and something metallic underneath, sharp and sweet. I wanted to call out, to tell it to leave, to tell myself I was only talking to the empty air. But my throat had locked shut. Then a shadow appeared. It slid across the faint strip of light at the bottom of the door, stretching into my room. Too tall for a person, the head dipping forward, limbs too long to be right. It didn't move for nearly a minute. Just stood there, the sound of faint breathing or maybe the wind seeping through the gap beneath the door. I closed my eyes and waited. Eventually the shadow shifted. The steps began again, slow and steady, moving away down the hallway. I didn't move for the rest of the night. When morning finally bled into the room, pale and colorless, I unlocked the door. The hallway was empty. The mark wasn't. It had reached my doorframe, and now there were two faint, parallel streaks running alongside it, drag marks, thin and straight, like something had been pulling itself forward with long, skeletal fingers. I didn't sleep again after seeing the mark at my door. Instead, I sat at the desk in my room, staring through the blinds of the backyard while the sun climbed reluctantly over the horizon. The light out there didn't seem right. It was dimmer than it should have been, like it had to pass through something thick before it reached the ground. Even the dew on the grass looked gray instead of clear. The trees beyond the fence were still, their branches stiff and brittle looking. I told myself I should go out there, maybe follow the line of the mark back outside and see where it started. But the thought of actually being in that yard made my stomach knot. By late morning, I finally forced myself downstairs. The kitchen smelled faintly of coffee grounds from the day before, though I couldn't remember making any. I stood by the back door for a long time, hand on the lock, staring at the yard through the warped pane of glass. The grass was unbroken except for one patch directly in the center, where the blades were flattened in a wide, uneven circle. I told myself it was just where an animal had slept. Deer sometimes bedded down in fields, leaving those kinds of shapes, but the circle wasn't neat. It looked disturbed, as if whatever had made it hadn't been resting, but shifting constantly, its weight rolling in uneven bursts. I unlocked the door and stepped outside. The air smelled wrong again, thick and damp, the same scent I'd breathed in through the door last night. It clung to the back of my throat. The flattened grass was colder than the rest of the yard when I stepped into it. I knelt, pressing my palm into the ground, and felt moisture seep into my skin. Not dew. Something else. That's when I saw the trail. It was faint, almost invisible unless you caught the light just right. 2 parallel grooves leading from the circle straight toward the house, exactly like the streaks I'd seen in the hallway. I stood quickly and followed the grooves with my eyes. They led right to the back steps, and then they stopped, as if whatever had made them had simply lifted itself up. I didn't stay out there. I locked the back door and spent the rest of the day downstairs, pretending to read, but really just listening. Every sound the house made felt amplified, like the walls were trying to speak to me in some language I didn't understand. By the time night came, the wind had picked up again. It rattled the old windows, making the glass chatter in their loose frames. I didn't turn on many lights. I remembered the old man in the store telling me to keep them off. Around midnight, the noise started, not the scream, not yet. This was softer, slower, something moving in the yard. I crept to the downstairs window, careful not to make the floorboards groan. The glass was cold beneath my fingertips. At first, I couldn't see anything. The yard was just shifting shades of gray in the moonlight, the trees swaying lazily in the wind. But then, in the far left corner by the fence, something moved against the grain of the wind. It was taller than any person I'd ever seen. The way it stood made my stomach clench. It was slightly hunched, like its head was too heavy for its neck, and its arms hung low, almost brushing the ground. I told myself it was a trick of the shadows. Then it turned. I didn't see a face. I'm not sure it had one, but I could feel its attention snap toward me, like a physical weight pressing against my chest. The wind seemed to stop for a moment. Even the trees went still, and then it moved. Not fast, not running, just moving. Each step was long and unhurried, but I felt the space between us shrinking too quickly. The grooves in the yard were forming. As it walked, pressed deep into the earth by something heavier than it looked, I stumbled backward, away from the window. My heel caught on the rug, and I went down hard, the sound echoing too loud in the stillness. When I looked up again, it was gone. The yard was empty. I stayed on the floor for a long time, too afraid to move. The only sound was the faint ticking of the living room clock and the rush of my own breath. Eventually, I crawled toward the window again. The yard was still empty, but the flattened circle in the grass had grown wider. Something had been waiting there for a long time. I didn't go upstairs that night. After seeing the thing in the yard, I locked every door, every window, and shoved the old sofa against the back door for good measure. It was ridiculous. I knew it could come from anywhere, maybe even through the walls if it wanted, but doing something felt better than doing nothing. I left the lights off again, not because I wanted to follow the old man's advice, but because somehow, instinctively, I knew light would only help it find me. I sat in the corner of the living room where I could see both the front and back doors. The clock on the wall ticked far too loud, marking every second like it was trying to remind me how slowly time could move. At first, the night was still. The wind had gone. Even the tree branches outside were motionless, like the whole world was holding its breath. My own breathing seemed too loud in that silence. Then, around 2 a.m., I heard the first sound. A single, soft tap against the back door. Not a knock. Not wooden wood. This was softer, damp somehow, as if something wet had made contact. I froze. My eyes went to the sofa I'd shoved against the door. I told myself it had just been the house settling. Then came the second tap, louder this time. And the third. This one didn't stop. It dragged along the door, slow and deliberate, tracing its way from the top corner down toward the lock. My skin crawled. I imagined long, thin fingers feeling their way toward the handle. The sound stopped. I didn't. Move. My eyes were locked on the door, my hands clutching the armrest of the chair so tightly my nails dug into the fabric. And then, very softly, came the breathing. It was just on the other side. Deep, slow inhalations that seemed to pull the air from the room with each breath, leaving me lightheaded. I don't know how long I sat there staring at the door. Time was meaningless in that moment, only the rhythm of that breathing existed. Then, with a low groan of wood, the sofa shifted. Only an inch, but enough to tell me something was pushing. The legs scraped across the floor, and the sound was unbearable in the silence. I stood quickly, heart pounding in my ears, and took 2 steps toward the kitchen. My brain screamed at me to run, but my feet hesitated. That hesitation nearly cost me everything. The knock came again, but this time from the front door. 3 sharp raps. I spun around. The hallway leading to the front entrance was bathed in faint moonlight, leaking through the window panes. And in that pale light, I saw a shadow stretched impossibly long across the floor. The shape was wrong, the head tilted at an unnatural angle, the arms hanging lower than they should. It wasn't moving, just standing there on the other side of the door. The breathing started again, my knees nearly buckled. The sound was closer now, clearer. I could hear the wet click of something inside its throat. Then came the whisper. It wasn't in any language I knew. It was low, almost a murmur, the syllables running together like thick liquid. But the intent was there. It was speaking to me. The whisper grew louder, and my ears began to ring. My hands went numb. I stumbled backward into the living room. My foot caught on the rug again, and I went down hard for the second time that night. The front door rattled in its frame. The back door groaned, both at once. It was moving between them faster than it should have been able to, like it existed in both places at once. My vision blurred, my chest tightened. Then, just as suddenly as it began, it stopped. No breathing, no knocking, nothing. I stayed on the floor until the gray light of morning bled into the room. When I finally stood, I noticed something that made my stomach twist. Both doors, front and back, had the same long, wet streaks running from top to bottom. The same kind I'd first seen in the hallway upstairs. The mark wasn't just in the house now. It was circling it. I told myself I wouldn't go into the woods for days. I'd avoided even looking at them too long. They were just wrong. The air above them shimmered faintly when the sun hit at a certain angle, like heat coming off asphalt, except it wasn't heat. It was the opposite cold, so cold it made the hairs on my arms rise from across the yard. But when morning came, after the night of the knocking, I couldn't stay inside. Something had changed. The marks were still on both doors, long, dark streaks that hadn't dried, even after hours. But there was something else now, a trail. It wasn't like the faint grooves I'd seen before. This was heavier. The grass in the backyard had been pressed flat in 2 deep parallel lines, leading straight to the tree line. I stood at the window for a long time, just staring. My mind kept telling me to call someone, police, neighbors, anyone, but I knew what they'd say. I'd seen it in their eyes already. Either they truly didn't believe, or they believed too much and were pretending. Not to. I put on my boots. The ground outside felt spongy underfoot, like it had been soaked through from rain, though the air was dry. The trail was worse up close. The grass wasn't just bent, it was shredded, as if something had dragged itself forward, tearing the blades as it moved. I followed it to the edge of the yard. The wall of trees was denser than I'd realized. From the house, each trunk rose straight and narrow, bark flaking in long curls. The smell was stronger here, damp earth and something faintly metallic, like rust. The trail didn't hesitate. It went straight in, cutting a clean path through the undergrowth. I stepped over the first roots and felt the temperature drop immediately. The air in the woods was still, heavy. I couldn't even hear birds. The deeper I went, the narrower the trail became, as if whatever had made it was slimming down, or the trees themselves were pressing closer to it. About 20 yards in, I started seeing the marks. They were on the trees now. Long vertical streaks, wet and dark, glistening faintly in the dim light. Some ran from the base of the trunk all, the way up past my line of sight. I didn't want to touch them, but I couldn't help it. My fingertips came away slick, and the substance clung stubbornly, refusing to dry. It was cold. The trail turned sharply to the left, and when I followed, I saw it, the clearing. It wasn't large, maybe 30 feet across, ringed by tall, thin trees leaning slightly inward. The ground here was bare dirt, no grass, no leaves. In the center was a mound, about waist high, covered in the same dark streaks that marked the trees. I don't know why I stepped closer. The mound wasn't solid. Up close, I could see small openings, like burrows, all facing outward. The streaks were thickest around those openings. Something had been going in and out. I crouched, peering into one. The hole was deeper than I expected. My breath fogged in the air before me, though the day wasn't cold. Somewhere inside that mound, something shifted. It was subtle, just the faintest rustle, like fabric brushing against stone. But it was enough to send me stumbling backward. As I moved, the air in the clearing seemed to tighten, pressing in from all sides. The trees leaned closer. The shadows deepened. Then I heard it, the same whisper from the other night. It wasn't coming from one direction, it was all around. Me leaking from the trees, the mound, the very ground. The syllables slid together in that same liquid murmur, and though I didn't understand the words, I understood the meaning. It was telling me I was welcome, that I belonged here. My legs wanted to move forward. Every rational part of my brain screamed to run, but my body took a step toward the mound. My hands lifted, palms open. I was 2 steps away when something cut through the whisper, a single sharp snap of a branch from the far side of the clearing. The sound broke whatever hold they had on me. I turned and ran. Branches scraped my arms, roots caught my boots, but I didn't stop until I burst back into my yard. The air there felt too hot, too bright. I slammed the door behind me and locked it twice. When I looked out the window a minute later, the trail was gone. The grass was standing straight again, but in the center of the yard, in the exact spot where I'd first seen the flattened circle, the dirt was bare. No grass, no roots, just earth, like something was getting ready to come back up. I didn't sleep after coming back from the clearing. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw it again, the mound with its hollow mouths. The streaks glistening like wet tar, the way the trees had leaned toward me as if they were listening. And beneath it all, the whisper, curling inside my ears like smoke. I showered twice, scrubbing my skin until it burned. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that something clung to me. Not just dirt, not sweat, something colder. By mid-morning, the house didn't feel right anymore. The light coming through, the windows had a faint green tint, as if filtered through water. The air was heavy, sluggish. Even the ticking of the clock on the wall had slowed, each second landing with a dull, deliberate weight. I went into the kitchen to make coffee, thinking, caffeine might ground me. But when I opened the cupboard, I froze. There, smeared across the inside of the door, was a dark, wet streak. It was fresh. I slammed the cupboard shut and spun around. The counter had another streak, the handle of the fridge. The wall by the sink, the marks were inside now. I backed out of the kitchen, my heart hammering in my throat. The hallway was worse. Every few feet, there was another smear, some vertical, some angled, like something had dragged its fingers along the wall. They glistened faintly in the dim light, and the smell hit me then. Damp soil, sharp and metallic beneath it. I told myself to leave. Just walk out the door, get in the car, and drive until the tank was dry. But the moment I touched the doorknob, my hand froze, because it was already there. A streak ran down the length of the brass, curling around it, in a perfect spiral, as if something had wrapped its whole hand around me. From the inside, I jerked my hand back. My palm tingled, cold spreading up my arm in a slow wave. When I looked down, I saw it faint, almost invisible, but there, a mark. It wasn't dirt. It was under the skin like a bruise, except it wasn't purple or blue. It was dark, too dark. My fingers twitched on their own. The skin around the mark felt loose somehow, as if it were no longer entirely mine. I stumbled into the bathroom and turned on the light. My reflection was pale, eyes wide, hair sticking damply to my forehead. I shoved my sleeve up. The mark on my hand wasn't alone. Another streak ran along my forearm, and another thinner one across my collarbone, peeking from beneath my shirt. I didn't remember touching the streaks in the house. Not that many. Something wet dripped onto the sink. I looked up. There was a mark on the mirror right above my head, long, vertical, glistening, and the whisper was back. It was so close now that it felt like it was in my skull. The syllables weren't liquid this time. They were sharp, deliberate, and I realized with a sick twist of the gut that they were counting. Not numbers, not in English. But the rhythm, the spacing counting down, I didn't want to know what happened when it reached the end. I staggered back, nearly slipping on the bathroom tile, and that's when I saw the movement in the mirror. It wasn't me. Behind my reflection, the bathroom doorway was dark. In that darkness, something leaned just far enough in for the light to catch its outline. Long arms, head tilted, fingers brushing the frame. The streaks on my skin pulsed, and then for a second my legs started to move toward it. I screamed raw animal and shoved myself backward into the wall. My shoulder hit hard. The thing didn't move. The countdown in my head reached the next beat. It smiled. No teeth, no lips, just the shape of a smile where a face should have. Then the lights flickered. When they steadied, the doorway was empty. But the streaks in the hall were darker now, fresher, leading upstairs. The streaks on the stairs looked wet, but when I reached out, my fingers didn't come away slick got, they came away cold. It was the same cold as the clearing, the kind that doesn't sit on your skin, but sinks into you, traveling straight to the bone. I shivered so hard my teeth clacked. The whisper hadn't stopped since the bathroom. The countdown beat on, slow, but relentless, and each number felt like a tap on the inside of my skull. I should have left. God, I should have left. But the thing about the streaks was that they didn't just lead somewhere, they pulled. My eyes followed them up the stairs, around the corner, toward the narrow hallway. I was moving before I realized. I'd taken the first step. The hallway light flickered when I reached the top. The walls on either side were streaked like the trunk of 100 trees, and the smell earth and rust was so strong here I had to breathe through my mouth. I passed the first bedroom. The streaks went right past it. The second bedroom too. And then they stopped. Not faded, not broken. Just stopped dead in front of the last door at the end of the hall, my bedroom. I stood there for a long time, my breath loud in my ears. The whisper in my head was slower now, as if savoring. The space between beats, the mark on my hand pulsed in time with it. I turned the knob. The room looked exactly as I'd left it. Unmade bed. Clothes piled in the corner. The window half open to let in the late afternoon air. But the light felt wrong. It had the same faint green tinge I'd seen earlier in the kitchen, as though the outside world was being filtered through something that wasn't quite air. I took a step inside. The door clicked shut behind me. There was a new sound, now soft, irregular, like something shifting its weight from one foot to the other. It came from the far side of the bed, where the shadows were thickest. I moved closer. The sound stopped. The whisper hit the next number in the countdown, and I realized with a jolt that I wasn't hearing it in my ears anymore. It was inside my chest, vibrating against my ribs. My heart started to pound with the same rhythm. The mark on my forearm darkened. I could feel it spreading. I leaned over the bed. Something was there, crouched low, arms folded tight against its chest. Its head jerked once, twice, in sharp, bird-like movements. The smile god, that smile spread wide, the curve of it catching the dim green light. It didn't move toward me. It didn't have to. The streaks on the floor began to writhe. They slithered toward me in slow, sticky lines, curling around my boots, creeping up my legs. My muscles locked. I couldn't look away from it. The whisper reached the second to last beat in the countdown. And then, all at once, the streaks tightened around my ankles and yanked. I hit the floor hard, air knocked out of me. My vision blurred, but I could still see the thing rising to its full height over me, arms unfolding like wings. The last beat came. The whispers stopped, and in the silence that followed, the house exhaled. Every wall, every floorboard, the very air around me seemed to sigh, as though it had been holding its breath until this moment. Something cold and wet pressed against my chest. I looked down. It was its hand. The streaks on my skin lit up in a flash of impossible darkness, like ink bleeding under glass. And then I wasn't in my bedroom anymore. I was standing in the clearing. The mound was taller now, its holes gaping wider, streaks spilling down the sides like veins. The trees leaned close, their bark splitting to reveal the same dark substance, dripping steadily onto the dirt. Behind me, the thing whispered again, not counting this time, calling, and something beneath the mound began to answer. The sound coming from beneath the mound was not like any animal I'd ever heard. It was wet, low, and impossibly deep, as though the earth itself had a throat. The ground trembled under my boots, the vibration crawling up my legs. My chest ached with each pulse, as if the thing inside the mound was breathing through me. The whisper at my back grew louder, more insistent. It no longer felt like it was speaking to me, it was speaking through me. My mouth moved without my permission, shaping sounds I didn't know, syllables that tasted like dirt and copper. The mound split, not all at once. The cracks spread slow, jagged lines, oozing with that same black substance that stained the trees, the streaks, my skin. Each fissure widened with a sick, stretching sound, and the air poured out hot and rank. Something inside shifted. I stumbled backward into the thing that had brought me here. Its arms, too long, too many joints, caught me in a grip that was neither hard nor gentle. It was possessive, as though it wasn't holding me in place, but holding me as its own. The ground before the mound collapsed inward. What rose from it was not a body, not entirely. It was a shape fluid, wrong, almost familiar, and yet built from angles no living thing should have. Limbs that folded in on themselves. A head that swiveled without turning. A chest that expanded and contracted in rhythms out of sync with breathing. The streaks on my arms burned. The marks on my skin pulsed in time with the thing's movements. My heart followed. I realized with a cold clarity that I was no longer breathing for myself. It was breathing for me. The trees bent low, their trunks groaning, bark splitting to spill more of the black liquid into the clearing. The smell was overwhelming, wet rot, iron, and something sweet underneath that made my stomach knot. The mound creature moved closer. It didn't walk. It shifted, closing the space between us in unnatural, shivering motions. My legs bent on their own. The thing behind me loosened its grip, letting me sink to my knees in the dirt. I wanted to fight. My mind screamed for it, but my body was no longer mine. The creature's head lowered until its hollow face was level with mine. The inside was nothing, no eyes, no mouth, just depth. Depth that pulled at me, like standing at the edge of a cliff and feeling gravity tip forward. A sound welled up from inside it, low, endless, the kind of sound that doesn't fade but swallows every other noise around it. My ears popped. My vision tunneled. The black liquid streaked from the holes in the mound, crawling toward me across the ground, like veins searching for a heart. When they touched my knees, they surged upward, wrapping my legs, my chest. Cold and heat burned through me at once. The thing behind me whispered one last time. Not a number, not a word, just a sound that meant mine. The world snapped. The clearing was gone. The mound was gone. The trees, the night, the stars all gone. I stood in a place that had no sky, no ground, just shifting darkness in every direction. My body was weightless but anchored, suspended, but not floating. And around me, shapes moved too far to touch, too close to ignore. They whispered too, and in their whispers I heard my voice join in. The first time I saw the eyes, I thought I was losing my mind. God, it was late. Later than I should have been awake. The kind of late where the silence outside feels too deep, too heavy. I just turned off the lights, my body sinking into the mattress. The bed springs gave a tired groan, the cabin's wooden frame settling with me. I shut my eyes, already half on the edge of sleep when I saw them. 2 tiny pinpricks of light floated in the darkness behind my eyelids, not the scattered sparkles you see after staring at a screen too long, not the drifting shapes that come from blood vessels or optical illusions. No, these were still, steady, watching. At first, I thought my mind was making patterns out of nothing. I opened my eyes to the dark bedroom, squinting into the corner. Nothing there. Just the still, suffocating quiet of the cabin. The air smelled faintly of cedar, and the faint, stale scent of old furniture. I told myself it was nothing. Stress. Exhaustion. Shadows playing tricks on me. But when I closed my eyes again, they were still there. I jolted upright, heart pounding, staring into the dark. Still nothing. My laugh came out too quickly, too sharp, as if I could force the fear out. With sound. I told myself I was being ridiculous, that the mind does strange things when it's tired. I made a promise to stop doom scrolling before bed. The next night, I broke that promise. And the eyes came back. This time, they were brighter, closer. There was weight to them, a presence pressing against me through the darkness. I felt my breathing slow, as if my body instinctively didn't want to make a sound. When I opened my eyes, expecting the comfort of an empty room, they didn't vanish. They stayed, floating in the corner, and then they blinked. I froze. The sound of my own heartbeat filled my ears. The blinking wasn't random. It was slow, measured, deliberate. The glow of the eyes was faint. But in the darkness, it was enough to cut through every shadow. They hovered at the same height as my head, watching. I gripped the blanket, fingers tightening like I could shield myself with it. My eyes darted around the rest of the room. The dresser stood where I'd left it. The half-unpacked boxes sat by the door. The lamp's pull chain swayed gently, though I didn't remember touching it. Everything was normal, everything except those eyes. "Who's there?" I whispered before I could stop myself. My voice cracked halfway through the sentence, the sound too small in the room's stillness. No answer came. But the light the eyes pulsed faintly, like the beat of a heart. My hand fumbled for the lamp switch. I nearly knocked it over before I found it. Light flooded the room, too bright, making me blink hard against the sudden glare. My vision cleared. The corner was empty. I stayed like that for a long time, sitting upright in bed, staring at the place where they'd been. The lamp buzzed faintly, the only sound besides my uneven breathing. My brain scrambled for explanations. Optical illusion. Dreaming while awake. Stress hallucination. But I hadn't been asleep, and I wasn't imagining the feeling that they'd been real. That night, I left the lamp on. God, it didn't help. The shadows in the cabin seemed darker now, deeper somehow, as though the light itself didn't want to reach them. By morning, I'd almost convinced myself it was nothing. Almost. That evening, as the sun dipped below the tree line, the dread came back. The cabin was the kind of quiet where every creak of the floorboards felt too loud. I brushed my teeth, washed my face, and moved through my bedtime routine like a man trying to pretend everything was fine. The laugh I forced out as I slid into bed sounded hollow, brittle. I left the lamp on again. The shadows on the walls shifted with every flicker of the bulb, twisting into strange shapes that melted away when I tried to focus on them. I closed my eyes for a moment just to rest them, and snapped them open. Nothing. Stillness. The room was calm. Eventually I gave in. My eyelids grew heavy, I let them fall. And there they were. The eyes were brighter this time, clearer. They weren't just points of light anymore, they had depth. A faint ring of darkness around them. A subtle wet gleam that suggested something alive. I kept my eyes shut, paralyzed, hoping that maybe if I ignored them, they'd go away. They didn't. They grew closer. It wasn't movement I saw, it was something I felt, like the space between us was shrinking with every second. My heart hammered in my chest as I forced my eyes open. They didn't disappear. They hovered now at the foot of my bed, and then 2 more pairs blinked into existence beside them. The room was silent except for the sound of my blood rushing in my ears. My mouth was dry, my throat tight, but I heard it anyway. A whisper in the dark, dot soft. Sibilant. Too close. You see? US now. I didn't sleep the rest of that night. Every time I closed my eyes, the eyes were there watching from the foot of my bed, joined now by more pairs in the darkness. The whisper had been so close I'd felt the breath of it against my ear, but when I jerked upright, the air was still and stale. By morning, I was running on caffeine in denial. The pale winter sunlight slanted through the blinds, making the cabin feel less like a coffin and more like a place a sane person might live. I told myself it had been a dream, the kind of vivid nightmare that latches onto you and won't let go, but I didn't believe it. That night, I left the lamp on again. I sat up in bed reading, trying to keep my mind busy. Every creak of the wooden walls made me flinch. The shadows seemed to twitch at the edges of my vision. Midnight came. 1 a.m. passed. At some point, exhaustion won. My eyes closed without my permission. A sound woke me. Not the whisper this time, a knock. It was soft 3 slow, deliberate taps against the cabin's front door. I sat perfectly still, every muscle in my body locking up. Maybe it was the wind. Maybe an animal. Another knock. Louder this time. I climbed out of bed, each step on the cold floorboards echoing far too loud in my ears. The air was freezing against my bare skin. My breath came out in pale clouds as I moved down the short hallway toward the living room. The knocks came again, perfectly spaced, as though whoever or whatever was outside was patient. I reached the front door and pressed my ear to it. Silence. No footsteps, no rustle of branches, just the faint hum of the old fridge in the kitchen. Then, right by my ear, something whispered, not words this time. Just a long, low sound, like a sigh dragged out until it was nearly a growl. I stumbled back so hard I hit the coat rack, knocking it over with a crash. The noise echoed through the cabin. My hands shook as I grabbed the nearest thing, a heavy flashlight, and pointed it at the door. The metal knob began to turn. My stomach dropped. No one had keys to this place but me. It stopped halfway, as if whoever was trying to come in had changed their mind. Then, slow as a heartbeat, the knob turned back into place. I waited. Counted the seconds in my head. When I hit 30, I lunged forward and threw the door open. Nothing. The porch was empty. The yard beyond was a flat sheet of moonlit snow, untouched except for a single line of footprints. They started at the tree line and ended halfway to the porch, as if the person had simply stopped walking and vanished. I stepped out, the boards creaking under my weight. The night air burned in my lungs. My flashlight beam swept over the snow, catching the sharp glint of frost on bare branches. That's when I saw them, not eyes this time. Not exactly dot in the darkness between the trees. Shapes shifted dot tall, too tall. Their outlines were wrong, too narrow at the middle, too long in the arms, heads cocked at unnatural angles. And though the distance was impossible to cross in an instant, I felt them closer, felt their attention pinning me where I stood. One of them stepped forward, just enough for the moonlight to catch on a pale, almost reflective surface where its face should have been no features, just smooth emptiness, except for the two small indentations where eyes might have been. I took a step back. My heel caught on the porch threshold. My flashlight flickered. In the heartbeat of darkness, they were gone. I slammed the door, locked it, and shoved the deadbolt in place. Then I dragged the old dresser from the hallway and wedged it against the frame for good measure. Sleep didn't come. Not really. I dozed in the armchair by the window, every creak and sigh of the cabin making my eyes snap open. When morning finally came, I checked the porch again. The footprints in the snow were still there. But now they didn't end halfway to the porch. They ended right at my door. By the third night, I was running on fumes that my hands shook when I poured coffee in the morning, spilling it down the counter. My eyes burned from lack of sleep, and every sound made me flinch. I kept telling myself I should leave the cabin drive. Into town, get a motel, just go. But every time I thought about it, my chest tightened. It wasn't fear of leaving Dot, it was fear of what might follow me. That morning, I checked the porch again. The footprints were still there, even after a night of wind. Perfectly preserved, I crouched down, staring at them. They weren't shaped right. Too long in the heel, too narrow in the toe. They looked almost wrong for a human foot, but not enough for me to be certain. The rest of the day passed in a blur. I left the radio on just to have noise in the background. Every so often, I'd think I heard faint tapping not at the door this time, but along the walls like someone running their fingertips over the wood. By sunset, my nerves were raw. I told myself I wouldn't look out the windows tonight. I wouldn't check the porch. I wouldn't listen for knocks. That resolve lasted until midnight. It started with the soft sound at the bedroom window. Not a knock, more like a single fingernail dragging down the glass. Slow, deliberate. I froze in bed, staring at the curtain. My breath came in shallow, uneven pulls. The sound came again, just as slow, but from the opposite side of the window this time. Like whatever it was had moved. I grabbed the flashlight and pulled the curtain back in one motion. Nothing. Just snow and trees and moonlight. But my eyes caught something strange in the reflection. Two faint, glowing points hovering over my own shoulder. I whipped around. No one was there. My pulse thundered in my ears. I turned back to the window and the reflection was normal again. That's when I noticed my wrist. The skin there was paler than the rest of me and marked with 3 small, evenly spaced indentations. They were too shallow for cuts, too deep for scratches. Bruised dark around the edges. I ran my fingers over them, expecting pain, but there was none. Just an odd coldness, like the skin there wasn't entirely mine anymore. I couldn't explain it, and I didn't want to. I shoved my sleeve down and tried to convince myself it was nothing. The rest of the night was worse. I didn't see the eyes, but I felt them always just behind me, always close enough to make my neck prickle. I kept catching movement in my peripheral vision, but every time I turned my head, the shadows were still. By dawn, my stomach churned with exhaustion. I told myself I'd check the marks again. Maybe take a photo to prove to myself they were real. I rolled up my sleeve. There were more. Not just on my wrist now, but climbing up the inside of my arm in a neat, deliberate line. Each one perfectly spaced as though measured. Panic welled up sharp and hot in my chest. I grabbed my phone, meaning to call anyone, but the screen flickered and died the moment I unlocked it. Dead battery, even though I charged it that morning. That was when the knocking started, again. This time it wasn't at the front door. God, it came from the hallway. 3 slow, deliberate knocks. Exactly the same rhythm as before. My throat went dry. The hallway was empty, no doors to knock on except the one to my bedroom, which was standing wide open. Another knock. Louder. Closer. I backed toward the bed, my flashlight shaking in my grip. The sound came right behind me this time, like someone had wrapped their knuckles against my spine. I spun, the beam slicing through the air. Nothing. The knocking stopped. but I knew it wasn't gone. I could feel it, like the pressure in the air before a storm. That was when I heard the whisper again, right at my ear. "You're almost ready." By the fourth day, the cabin didn't feel like the same place I'd moved into. The walls seemed closer somehow, as though the angles had shifted in the night. Shadows lingered longer than they should, clinging to the corners like cobwebs. The air inside was cold enough to make my breath mist, even though the heater was on full blast. I hadn't slept in over 30 hours. Every time I closed my eyes, I felt it leaning over me, its breath cold and damp against my skin. It never touched me when I was awake, but I knew it could. The marks up my arm were proof enough of that. I tried distracting myself by cleaning, wiping down the counters, dusting shelves, but it was pointless. I'd turn away for a second, and when I looked back, something would be out of place. A mug turned upside down. A chair angled toward the wall. The radio dial tuned to static instead of music. At one point, I set the flashlight on the kitchen table while I went to grab more batteries. When I came back, the light was gone. I found it in the bathroom sink, turned on, the beam pointed straight up at the mirror. That was when I noticed the reflection wasn't quite right. My face stared back at me, but my eyes were wrong, too wide, too pale. The pupils shrunk into pinpoints. The reflection smiled before I did. I left the light where it was and walked out without looking again. The knocking didn't come that night. Instead, there was movement, soft, deliberate footsteps that traveled the length of the hallway again and again. I sat on the couch with my knees drawn to my chest, listening as they passed closer and closer to the living room. The sound stopped just before reaching the doorway. Silence. Then something pressed down on the couch cushion beside me. The fabric dipped under an invisible weight. My whole body locked up, and I couldn't bring myself to look. I just stared, straight ahead at the black TV screen until I saw it. Not my reflection this time, its reflection. Pale and tall, leaning forward, the featureless face angled toward me like it was studying prey. My chest constricted and every nerve screamed at me to run, but I couldn't. It was like my body didn't belong to me anymore. The moment broke when the TV switched on by itself. No static, no sound, just a frozen image of the cabin's porch. As though filmed from the tree line, I stumbled backward, tripping over the coffee table. My head hit the floor hard enough to make my vision blur. When I looked up again, the screen was black. The cushion beside me was flat again. The night passed in fragments. I remember standing in the kitchen and hearing my name spoken from the bedroom. I remember opening the front door just to see if the snow still held the footprints. It did, and they were deeper now, as though whatever made them was heavier. I remember the marks on my arm spreading past the elbow, and I remember the voice. Not the whisper anymore, but something lower, cooler. A voice that filled the cabin from wall to wall, making the glass in the windows tremble. "You belong here." I pressed my hands over my ears, but it didn't help. The voice wasn't coming from outside, it was inside my head, threading through my thoughts like it had always been there. I don't remember going to bed. I just remember waking up sometime in the gray light before dawn, standing barefoot on the porch without knowing how I'd gotten there. The cold burned my skin, but I couldn't move until the first sliver of sun rose over the trees. Only then did whatever held me in place let go. When I went back inside, I noticed something new. The walls were marked faint scratches running in long, even lines from floor to ceiling. They matched the spacing of the marks on my arm perfectly. I woke to the sound of breathing, not my own. It was slow and deep, like someone sleeping inches from my ear. When I opened my eyes, the room was pitch black. I reached for the flashlight on the nightstand, though my hand found nothing. The breathing stopped. For a moment I thought it was gone, but then the mattress dipped beside me, just like the couch had days earlier. The air shifted, colder now, carrying a smell I couldn't place: wet soil, maybe, or rotting leaves. Something that had been underground. Too long, I didn't move, didn't dare. A weight settled against my ribs. Not crushing, but heavy enough to remind me I wasn't alone. The marks on my arm pulsed with that same unnatural cold, and in the dark I swore I could feel them deepening, sinking into bone. When the voice came, it was inside my skull again, curling through my thoughts like smoke. Stop resisting. I tried to speak, but my jaw wouldn't open. My tongue felt heavy, clumsy, like it belonged to someone else. The weight shifted, and something cold brushed my cheek. Fingers. Maybe if fingers could be that thin. They traced down to my throat, pausing over my pulse. The voice spoke again. You're ready now. The room around me began to change. Not quickly, not with a flicker, but like the cabin itself was melting in slow motion. The walls bowed inward. The ceiling arched until it was almost overhead, like the inside of a throat. The floor stretched and tilted under me. Shadows swam along the walls in thick, liquid movements, ignoring the direction of the light that wasn't there. They curled toward me, pooling at the bed's edge, and I realized they weren't shadows at all. They were arms. Dozens of them. They slid onto the mattress, fingers spider-long, curling around my ankles and wrists. They didn't pull hard. They didn't have to. My body was still refusing to move. One by one, the marks on my arm lit up, not with light exactly, but with awareness. Each one burned cold, and the sensation spread, threading through my veins until my chest ached. The ceiling was gone now. Above me was nothing but a pale, endless expanse, like the inside of fog. Shapes moved in it, long-limbed, faceless things, crawling in and out of sight. I felt the mattress begin to sink. The arms were pulling, not down into the bed, but into whatever lay beneath it. The sound of breathing was everywhere now, not from one thing, but from many, like a tide of lungs inhaling in unison. The voice was louder. You belong here. I wanted to scream, but all that came out was a thin exhale. My body slid toward. The dark pooling under me, the sheets twisting around my legs as though they too wanted me gone. In the corner of my vision, I saw the mirror on the dresser. It showed me the room as it had been before, the bed, the walls, the ordinary shadows, but my reflection was gone. In its place was the pale figure from the TV screen, standing exactly where I lay. The marks on my arms flared again, and this time I didn't feel cold. I felt nothing. No fear, no thought, no me. The arms pulled one final time, and the fog swallowed the ceiling, the bed, the walls, the mirror, everything. I was falling, but not downward. The space around me folded, and the pale figure folded with it, until there was no space at all, just the endless, quiet breathing in the dark. When my eyes opened again, I was on the porch. Snow covered the steps. My footprints led up to the door, and behind them, fresh ones too long in the heel. Too narrow, and the toe stood in perfect alignment with mine, as if they'd been made at the same moment. The cabin door swung open on its own, and I stepped inside,